Good evening, folks. Will Gray Eagle here. You're watching the Deep State Chronicle. It is February 16th, 2020. It is Sunday. This segment is yet another chapter of the Adam and Eve story by Mr. Chan Thomas. This chapter is Genesis, 4.5 million years ago, and this Regenesis, 11,500 years ago, both in the Bible. A translation interpretation of Genesis 1, 2, and 3 from a reconstruction of what the Naga must have given to us, the chapters if we have them in English, then retranslating directly from Naga to English, bypassing Greek and Hebrew. The book of Genesis, chapters 1, 2, and 3. In the beginning, 4.32 billion years ago, the universe was created in God's great design. Included was our sun and our planet Earth. During one of the many cataclysms that occurred during the Earth's history, this one being 11,500 years ago, the Earth's lands were all inundated with raging waters and ravaged by horrendous winds, and the oceans were all dark with muddiness. And the ill wind thundered over the troubled waters also. And as the storms abated, sunlight came back to the face of the earth as God intended. And while the cataclysm was abating once more, darkness and sunlight were reestablished, indistinguishable, and it was good. And sunlight was again daytime, and darkness was again nighttime, in accordance with God's design, and evening and morning made one day. Again, God's original design was that there be a sky between the clouds and oceans, and in accordance with God's design, the heavens were reestablished in that the sky again stood between the clouds and the oceans, as the onslaught of the great cataclysm abated. God's heavens were indeed reestablished, and that evening and morning were the beginning of the second day. And God's design was that the lands would not be entirely covered by the oceans as they were immediately following a cataclysm, so the disrupted oceans, now settling, drained off the higher lands. And also in accordance with God's design, the dry land was earth, and the waters oceans, and once again it was reestablished as good as God intended. And since God's design was that the earth should bring forth grass and herbs yielding their seed, and the fruit yielding fruit containing its seed, and the earth was again reestablished. Therefore the earth being reestablished brought forth grass and herbs, yielding the seed, and the fruit trees yielding fruit containing its seed, and it was good, as God intended. And the evening and the morning were the start of the third day. In accordance with God's design, there were normally lights in the heavens, which serve to indicate months and seasons and days and years. Hold on, let me switch my glasses. That's better. Also, they serve to furnish light on the earth as God intended. And as the great fog lifted and the clouds broke, the sun and the moon reappeared, and also the stars. And once again, as God intended, they shone from the heavens. And the sun and the moon again were able to divide light and darkness, which was good. And the evening and the morning were the start of the fourth day. And it was God's will that some of every creature living and bird flying should survive this cataclysmic inundation. Surviving then were the great whales, and every living creature of the sea, and every kind of winged fowl, and it was as God intended, and good. And they were blessed with God's original design to be fruitful and reproduce, and replenish the oceans with sea life, and the air with fowl. And the evening and the morning were the start of the fifth day. And it was God's will that some of every creature, cattle, and creeping thing, and beast of the earth, should survive the cataclysmic inundation. And so surviving then were the beasts, the cattle, and everything that creeps on the earth. And it was as God intended and good. In accordance with God's design, man, who was created in the image God intended, also was to survive and have dominion over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So it was God's design that man, who was created in the image God intended, both male and female, would survive the cataclysmic inundation. Brief commentary here. I'll look for this research paper and I'll post a segment on it. It's believed that mitochondrial Eve is not one common female ancestor, but a breakdown of up to 18 fertile females who would have been the only females to survive the cataclysm. And these 18 females would have been the only mothers, progenitors of our human race going forward. And so it goes without saying that mitochondrial Eve is one of 18 females. Again, these would have been the only females left after the last cataclysm. And God's design was that man, being given every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to man it should be for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, wherein there is life. God's design was that green herbs shall serve for food, and it was as God intended. And everything which survived was as God had originally created, and still was in God's design, and it was good. And the evening and the morning were the beginning of the sixth day. Genesis 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were reestablished, all the host of them. And on the seventh day the recovery from the cataclysm and flood were complete. And the seventh day brought rest from the flight and fight for survival against the cataclysm and its after effects. And the seventh day brought God's blessed peace as the cataclysm had abated, leaving those of his creation that survived. These are the same regenerations of the heavens and of the earth as they were reestablished after the cataclysm previous to the one of this story, when the Lord God reestablished the earth and the heavens. And every plant of the field before that cataclysm was in the earth, and every herb in the field before it grew. For the Lord God had not brought rain upon the earth in this region, and there was not a man to till the ground. But there was this cataclysm, and great inundations rose over the earth. And it was God's will that man should rise up from the earth and keep the breath of life, and remain a living soul. This is his story. And from this land grew other civilizations on other lands, with the motherland in the midst of all being the seat of wisdom, of all knowledge, both good and evil. And the inundation destroyed Eden, and left only its 4 offspring lands. Note, the next 4 verses are probably incorrect or incomplete, with the true descriptions locked in correct translations of Egypt's Book of the Dead and the missing portion of the Piri Reis map. The first land is near the river Pison, which includes the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. There is bdellium and the onyx stone. And the second land is near the river Gihon, the same land which includes the whole land of Ethiopia, which I happen to believe is where the Ark of the Covenant happens to be today. And the third land is near the river Hiddekel. That is the land toward the east of Assyria. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Hebrew name. Excuse me for a second. Put out my cigarette. That is the land toward the east of Assyria, and the fourth land is near the river Euphrates. And it was in God's province that the man was of Eden, where he lived and toiled. And he was descended from the original mankind which settled the motherland. And God's design was that the man was warned, although the motherland was the source of all knowledge, both good and evil, that if he stay here therein, surely he would die. And it was God's design that the man should not be alone, therefore a mate shall be his. And since God had originally created every beast of the field and fowl of the air, and in his time Adam had named each one. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was no mate. For Adam's mate had died after giving birth to a child of Adam. And the child of the man was a female made in the image God intended. And Adam said, this child is bone of my bone, and flesh of my flesh. And she grew into womanhood. Therefore the man was both father and mother to her. And she abode with him, and they were of one flesh. And the climate was warm, requiring little or no clothing. Genesis 3. Verse 1. Now at the time of the beginning of this story, the oceans were in their normal state of quietness, and it was known to the woman of the story that she was not descended from any of the peoples of the lands which sprang from the mother continent. And God's design was that that woman would learn that people of the offspring lands would live on. But the people of the motherland from whom she had descended would surely all die. And she knew that in spite of the impending inundation, she surely would not die. For God's design that was that from the day she was born, she was descended from the original mankind of the motherland, and so was destined to know all, to discern both good and evil. And the woman being of the motherland, and being wise and good, knew that both she and her father were descended from the original mankind of the motherland. And they both were wise, and had lived a good life, and it was that time of the year when some clothing was needed for warmth. And in the cool of those days, when they were wondering to which of the offspring lands they should go, and God's presence was felt strongly by them, Adam felt God's call. And said, I have heard God's warning since summer, and have feared, for I knew not where to find refuge. And God's warning had come to him in the summer, as a warning to leave the land of his ancestors. And the man said, the woman, who is my daughter, and descended from my ancestors, gave me this knowledge. And asked her, what gift of knowledge has God given you? And the woman said, I am of your ancestors and inherit their wisdom, and the coming inundations of the oceans has been made known to me. And God's design was that all the oceans would so inundate the lands, and drown all cattle, and all beasts of the field, and bury all dust. And God was thus given me victory over the ocean, such that the seed of future generations is in you and me, for the oceans will drown all others. And God's design was that although the inundation would greatly multiply her sorrows, she would even so bring forth children, as her love would be for her husband, and his for her. And unto Adam it was God's will that he heed the words of his daughter, and God's warning that though they may be descendants of the original mankind of the motherland, they should leave, as its destiny was nature berserk, and if they stayed, surely they would regret it. And where Adam was to go, the land would be difficult to farm, with thorns and thistles abounding. And even so, the herb of the field was to be their food. By his own toil and sweat, he was destined to fight for survival after the inundation, even to the end of his days, where he would return to Mother Earth, as it was earth man came from, and unto earth he shall return. And after the inundation, Adam therefore made the woman his wife, and called her Eve, as she was to be the mother of all living from the motherland. And again, after the inundation, as they were in a colder climate, it was God's design, as part of their survival, that they make coats of skins and be clothed. And it was God's design that Adam take with him the knowledge of good and evil from the motherland, as he put forth and left in order to live. Therefore, in accordance with God's will, he left the Garden of Eden to survive and live from the soil where he was to go. So the man left, and the Garden of Eden was subjected to a cataclysm of earthquake and earth fire, and the motherland lost its foundations and sank beneath the oceans. That is the end of that chapter. You know what? I got through that so quickly. I think I'm going to post one more chapter tonight. Again, I am Will Gragel. You are watching the Deep State Chronicle. I haven't mentioned in this the last few videos that I posted. If you find these messages that I'm sharing with all of you important, please do share this with other friends and like-minded individuals. And more importantly, please also like this video and subscribe if you're new to this channel. That's it for this segment. I'm taking a quick potty break, and then I'm going to be right back.